welcome to Tracking. Taylor Majors here for Andress Engineering Associates. This morning we've got our 2021 Rail Industry Review, and let's jump right into the numbers. In 2021, total U.S. railcar loadings were just over 12 million. That's up 6.6% from 2020, but still down 7.4% from 2019. Excluding coal, total carloads in 2021 were up 5% from 2020, but still down 3.2% from 2019. Many expected 2021 to far exceed 2020 car loadings, but the yellow line through 2021 tells the tale. We had the micro freeze back in February that dropped loadings well below normal levels for the month. Then, in the second half of the year, as labor markets tightened, we noticed that capacity constraints kept car loadings to a minimum. Excluding 2020, ex-coal car loadings were the lowest since 2012. Total ex-coal car loads were 8.68 million for 2021. So why the drop-off in the back half of the year? Unfortunately, the rail industry isn't immune to the same supply chain bottlenecks that are affecting the greater economy. Rail executives have said as much in recent months, and they've cited the same problems, namely capacity constraint in the form of hiring crews, also labor issues supporting industries such as limited long-haul truckers. In a September 2021 Bloomberg interview, AAR CEO Ian Jeffries said the supply chain is only as good as its weakest link. Approximately 25% of rail freight moves through Chicago. The rate of local trucking picking up containers from Midwest terminals is severely backed up. That stops trains from making return trips as they wait for space at terminals to open up. Moving into the intermodal sector, intermodal loadings were incredibly strong in the first 6 months of the year, but saw the same effects in the back half. Those same supply constraints affected the second half of 2021 and lowered the year's total intermodal loadings. Even still, 2021 intermodal loadings were 14.142 million cars. That's the second best year on record, up 5% over 2020 and up 3.4% over 2021. The blue bars show the average weekly intermodal loadings by month in 2021. Note that with the exception of February, when we had the winter storm freeze, lead loadings were over 275,000 per week in every month. After June, we did not touch that number again, and we were 7 to 10% lower than the numbers of intermodal loadings we had the same time last year in the fourth quarter. If supply constraints level off in early 22, you could see a record year upcoming. However, with the same issues persisting as we start the year and no sign of clearance in sight, who can say when these loadings will rise back above the 275K per week mark? Turning to the broader economy, 2021 seems to have ended on a strong note. GDP in 2020 was minus 2.1% as we were in the lows of the pandemic, despite some decent numbers closing out the year that were getting close to normal. Going into 2021, everyone was expecting a fantastic, outlandish, unrepeatable year as far as GDP, with the bounce back that could be expected from the pandemic lockdowns. The first half of the year largely lived up to those expectations, with Q1 GDP at 6.3% and Q2 GDP at 6.7%. However, the introduction of the Delta variant, along with supply chain constraints starting to rear their head, left Q3 with just a paltry 2.1% GDP increase. The first reading of Q4's GDP increase will not be out until the end of January. However, the Conference Board is currently estimating Q4 at 6.5% with a total 2021 GDP rate of 5.6% over 2020. Since July and continuing today, the economic story continues to be a one-track mind, covering a lot of individual issues, supply constraints, namely supply chain and labor. On January 7th, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released its initial report of net new non-farm payrolls added in December. Estimate calls for close to 400,000 new jobs created. However, the report showed only 199,000, a miss of almost half. Further adding to this, the unemployment rate, which only includes people actively looking for work, dropped to 3.9%. Meanwhile, we have over 10 million jobs listed as open in the U.S. according to the latest jobs opening survey. Highlighting this, despite the seemingly low unemployment rate, Today, there are still 3.6 million less jobs than there were in the U.S. economy in February of 2020, just prior to the pandemic. When you add in population growth since then, it's actually 4.5 million jobs to put us in the same place that we were nearly 2 years ago now. We've talked about this before, and we won't go far into detail, but this is largely found and borne out in both the labor force participation rate and the employment to population survey. In December, the labor force participation rate stayed unchanged at 61.9%. In February, it was at 63.4%. February of 2020, that is. The employment to population ratio moved up 0.2% to 59.5%, but it is still off of 61.1% in February of 2020. Many possible reasons have been cited as to why employees have not returned to the labor force. Two of the leading theories right now seem to be lack of need, specifically people supported by partners and family, as well as recent government stimulus checks, and also older workers. We pointed out last month of the 5 million plus workers yet to return at that time, 3.4 million of those were 55 or older. We're not sure that they're ever going to return. With 2022, there are currently no expectations for additional stimulus checks. Also, the child tax credit recently expired. With this reduction in government benefits, will 2022 see the return of the labor supply in the economy that we so desperately need? We look forward to finding out. The other economic gorilla in the room, inflation. What was once thought of as transitory by Fed Chief Jerome Powell is now clearly not. The December Consumer Price Index showed an increase in prices of 0.5% for the month of December. That means that prices went up 0.5% just from November to December. Overall, 2021 CPI inflation was 7%. That's the highest reading since 1992. In that spirit, Jay Powell seems to be getting in touch with his Paul Volcker. The Fed chair has clearly indicated the Federal Reserve will accelerate the unwinding of pandemic relief methods. Current estimates are for 3 rate hikes in 2022, with many forecasters calling for 4. Even just several months ago, there wasn't any conviction that there were going to be any rate hikes in 2022. According to the CPI, the highest 2021 inflation category was energy, up 29.3% overall. Fuel prices were up nearly 50%. We've all seen that as the gas pump. Food was up 6.3%, including food at home up 6.5%, undercutting claims that food inflation has largely been only in restaurants where labor is a major factor. The CoreLogic Home Price Index report showed home prices were up 18.1% from November 2020 to November 2021. That's the highest reading in the index's 45-plus year history. While many are claiming inflation as a result of supply chain constraints, one question we look forward to watching is, will these improving supply chains in 2022 directly correlate to a drop in inflation? We plan on tracking those two indicators as we go throughout 2022. Some other economic indicators, the Purchasing Managers Index and Services PMI remain well in expansion territory. Industrial output and capacity utilization rose in November. December will be out later this month, but manufacturing rose 0.7% in November and reached its highest level since January 2019. The long-run average for capacity utilization is 79.6 from 1972 to 2020. In November, capacity utilization was 76.8. This is continued improvement and back within the range of normal run levels, but still off of the long-term averages. Consumer confidence ticked back up in December to 115.8. For all, over 2021, consumer confidence averaged 112.7. That's a marked improvement from where we were a year ago, but we're still well off the recent run rates above 120 from 2018 to the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic. Perhaps one of our most important factors, consumer spending. The U.S. is a consumer economy after all. Consumer spending accounts for about 70% of GDP. Consumer spending was reported at 0.6% increase in November 2021 over October. On the same note, personal savings rates soared to record levels during the pandemic as consumers halted spending and government stimulus payments ballooned. Since then, though, savings rates have returned to long-term levels between 5 and 10%. With savings lowering, this may be an early indicator we'll see more people return to the workforce in 2022. Further, inventory levels remain at multi-year lows. Even as supply chains add capacity and catch up to growing demand, it'll be some time before we work through the backlog. Finally, moving to individual rail commodity categories, chemicals have been a growing category for several years, and 2021 continued that trend. Total chemical car loadings were up 5.6%, or just under 1.7 million total loadings in 2021. As you can see from the chart on your screen now, this has been a steadily improving rate as the chemical industry has continued to invest in increased capacity and take advantage of lower feedstock costs. Grain, which we've touched on many times over the past several months, moved its most loadings since 2008 in 2021. 2020 was also a strong year, but 2021 was up over 2020 by 3.2%. Delays of grain exports we talked about in recent months seem to largely have subsided in the fourth quarter, contributing to a strong finish for the year. You can see this on the grain chart on your screen now. Coal, long in a downtrend, had a small resurgence in 2021. Coal loadings were up 10.9% over 2020. That said, 2021 was still the lowest year on record excluding 2020 and less than half of the peak years in the late 2000s. Metals have been on a tear this year. In 2021, U.S. steel producers added 20% of production compared to 2020. A 2-year stock chart of Nucor tells a great tale. From a low of just under $30 per share in March of 2020 at the heights of the pandemic, recent highs hit as much as $130 per share. Overall, carloads of metallic ores and metals were up 22.5% over 2020. Industrial products, a combination of 7 AAR commodity categories, and we have discussed before, were up 6.8% over 2020. That said, they were still well off the average levels of the past 10 years. Overall, in 2020, only 4 of the AAR's tracked commodity categories were down. That's all the time we have for today. We thank you for joining us on this first episode of Tracking in 2022. For all of us here at Andress Engineering, this is Taylor Majors wishing you a great day. And until next time, keep it on the rails.